Hello, my name is Rob Evans, and I'm the School Security Liaison Officer for Vermont's Agency of Education and the Department of Public Safety. And I'm joined here today with Rosie Kruger. Rosie is the Food Consultant and Child Nutrition Programs Consultant for Vermont's Agency of Education. And we're here to talk about some food-related programs that may help principals and superintendents deal with prior to, during, and after an emergency, and how these programs can assist your schools across the state. Prior to coming to the state of Vermont, Rosie worked as a congressional aide on Capitol Hill, handling agricultural and farm bill issues for a member of Congress from Maryland. She grew up in Shrewsbury and ate school lunch at Shrewsbury Mountain School and Mill River Union High School. And Rosie, thanks so much for being here and sharing this information with us.
Great. Thanks, Rob. Hi, everyone. So you're likely familiar with our child nutrition programs, the National School Lunch Program and the National School Breakfast Program. They are in place in all public schools in Vermont and many private schools as well. But what you probably don't know is that these programs can assist schools and communities when there is a disaster that affects individual students, or a disaster that closes the school, or maybe a large-scale disaster like we saw with Tropical Storm Irene that affects the whole community. So there are some resources available in your school meals program that you can fall back on and rely on in those times of distress. And we're going to talk about those today. The kind of biggest aha moment that I get from folks when I give this training is that we have some resources to help individual students who are displaced due to maybe a house fire or localized flooding or other emergency situations. And often communities step in. Principals or other members of the school community may pay personally for school meals for students in those situations. And a really important point that I want to make today is that you don't have to do that there are some resources available so that the federal government will step in and pay for those meals. And then there are some resources available to continue feeding students when there is an unexpected school closure, such as a power outage, school building is flooded, you might have a civil disturbance such as a teacher strike or a transportation strike, or even during snow days. We can still continue to feed students if students can get to the school or another local community center or other place where they can come to get meals. And then finally, those school meals programs can step in, again, like I said, during a Hurricane Irene type event. And we know that many school meals programs did step in during Tropical Storm Irene. School kitchens were used, school food service managers did a lot of cooking, and some resources were used, but folks on the ground didn't realize that there were these federal resources available, and so the schools and local communities ended up eating that cost. So we want to make sure that if something like that happens again, that you're aware that there are these federal resources, and you keep the correct documentation and paperwork so that you can rely on those federal resources.
Rosie, quick question. So public, private, independent schools can participate in this program.
Yes.
And it really doesn't matter how large or how small the incident might be, that there may be ways for folks to get reimbursed. House fire, small community-related event. It doesn't have to be a hurricane or tropical storm Irene type of event. Exactly.
And we're going to go through, what you need to do in each of those situations. But yeah, all public schools in Vermont have the school meals programs. It's a legislative requirement in our state, and then independent schools may participate in the school meals programs if they follow our requirements. So, like I said earlier, this is the biggest aha moment. So I've heard lots of stories about, an individual student or family has a house fire, and the community wants to pull together and help them out, and so somebody steps forward, a principal or a teacher, and ends up paying for their school meals. Well, when a student is displaced from their home, they are considered homeless, and that can be surprising to people. We don't generally tend to think of, a house fire turning somebody into our conception of what a homeless student is. But the federal definition of a homeless student is someone who who lacks a fixed, regular, or adequate nighttime residence. So someone who is even temporarily displaced from their home. Maybe they have to go live in a hotel for a week before the house is ready for them to return to, or they're able to go live with family. They are still lacking their fixed, permanent nighttime residence. And so when this situation happens, we can feed the student for free, and the federal government will pay for the cost of the student's meals as a free student. In this situation, if you know that the student is displaced, the best thing to do is relay that information to the school homeless liaison. Every supervisory union in Vermont has a designated school homeless liaison. And that homeless liaison can write a letter or do a quick memo that designates the student as homeless. And then that student is eligible for free meals. They can go on we call it the directly certified list of students who are eligible for free meals. And you can claim them as free in the state process. And that student, because they've been designated as homeless by the school homeless liaison, is then eligible for additional services such as school supplies or even things like glasses, clothes, that kind of thing. So this can be a real help when a family faces a house fire or other devastating home loss like that. If for some reason you cannot get in touch with your school homeless liaison, or that's not an appropriate way to go, the family themselves can fill out a new application for free or reduced price school meals, and on that application there's a little box that they can check that says homeless. So if you go that route and the family fills out a new application, then they're considered categorically eligible for school meals. And these are different, that directly certified, categorically eligible, those mean different things for the school meals program, but for the student, it just means that they get free meals. So it doesn't matter on the student end, your school food service program, those different categories mean different things.
Now, Rosie, if there are students from the same family in different schools, that one point of contact for the supervisory union can work with the parents to have that just be one form, one request for that reimbursement to happen for that entire family?
So the family can fill out different applications for different schools, or they can the school can pass that application around in the supervisory union. School homeless liaison, if it's somebody at the SU level, should be able to reach out. But this is one of those situations where if you can be proactive about it, if you know something, if you know a family has experienced a situation, go ahead and reach out to that homeless liaison. If you know that there are other students in the family at other schools, go ahead and reach out to those other schools. And this is something that you, as part of the school food service program or the school administration, can do, and we would encourage you to do. Finally, the school food service program staff can fill out a new application on behalf of the family if they know some specific concrete information about how the family has been affected. This is more of a gray area. Generally, we don't encourage program staff to go filling out applications on behalf of families. So if there's some reason that the family can't fill out the application, or you can't get the information from the school homeless liaison, we would encourage you to actually reach out to child nutrition programs and ask us if this is an appropriate situation for you to fill out an application on behalf of the family. In a presidentially declared disaster, affected and displaced families might receive something called DSNAP benefits. So these are received similar to 3 Squares Vermont, what we used to know as food stamps, where the family gets an EBT card. And in that case, they would have a family's case number, and they would eventually appear on your school's direct certification list that the school registrar pulls down from the state every month. This will take a longer time period to occur because it's just going through a bunch of administrative layers. But if we had something like another Hurricane Irene type event, you would, in later days, start seeing these families pop up on your direct certification list, and it would be because they would have qualified for DSNAP benefits. Once the student qualifies for free meals any of these ways, the student will be eligible for free school meals for the rest of the school year, plus the first 30 days of the following school year, even after they return to their home. So even if it's something that just displaces them from their home for 2 weeks or even a few days, they will qualify for free meals for the rest of that school year, plus the first 30 days, or until the family submits a new application, whichever is sooner. Just wanted to give you a little bit more information on identifying homeless students because, as I said before, this federal definition of homeless students sometimes is more encompassing than what we would think of as somebody necessarily just living on the street. So someone sharing the housing of others due to a loss of housing, economic hardship, or similar reason, living in a motel, hotel, campground. When we say trailer parks in this definition, we mean like a camping trailer park. Or living in emergency or transitional shelters, any of these things that are listed here will qualify the family for homeless assistance under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. There is a list of the Vermont Homeless Liaisons on the Vermont Agency of Education website. You can go to this address, or you can just Google Vermont School Homeless Liaisons and you'll find the list. So if you're not sure who is the appropriate contact in your supervisory union, you can look there. So the key here is to remember that even if the family has a place to stay, if it is not that fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, then they do qualify for these services. But also remember that the family can turn down this assistance. And some families would not feel comfortable or would not feel like they needed this assistance, and that's okay. You just want to let them know that they are eligible if this situation happens. So that's how we can feed individual students who are affected by a disaster. I do want to point out one final thing about that if there is a fire or flood or something that affects a local place of business, that affects the parent's employment, a family can fill out an application for free or reduced price meals, an income application at any point in the school year. So if somebody becomes unemployed or has their hours reduced because of some kind of, the mill in the town has a fire, or a restaurant has a fire where the parent works, that kind of thing, then you should certainly encourage the family to fill out a new application for free school meals, and they may qualify going forward based on that. Okay, so feeding students during an unexpected school closure. So when school is closed, when there isn't an instructional day, we can't operate the regular National School Breakfast Program or National School Lunch Program. But we can operate the Summer Food Service Program, or what's called the Seamless Summer Option. So these summer feeding programs can operate anytime during the year. It doesn't have to be summer, but only during an unexpected school closure. So for some reason, and I'm not sure why, but they can't operate during school vacation. But if you have an unexpected closure, a teacher strike, some kind of plumbing issue, snow day, any kind of unexpected school closure, you can go in and operate these programs and continue to feed kids. And we can actually feed kids ages 0 to 18 under these programs. And we can feed them at any location in the community. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the school building. Some examples of when you might operate that, we went over this already, but if we have a flooded school, power outage at school, strike, snow day, but again, we cannot use this during a scheduled school vacation. And again, those meals can be served at other locations in the community.
So, Rosie, if the school is closed down for an unexpected thing, whether that might be smoke in the building or hazardous materials issue that closes the school for a couple of days, you don't have to feed in the school. There could be another community shelter, a church where those meals could be brought, and you can feed those kids someplace else other than the school.
Exactly. And you can have multiple locations around the town. The wonderful thing about the Summer Food Service Program is that it doesn't need to be just one location at the school. You could have, something at the library, something at a church, at a housing development, or some other community center.
So schools that bring in kids from 8 different towns, you could try to decentralize the feeding process to get out to some of those towns, maybe not all of them, but try to get deliveries out so that they're not having to get into the school if it's a weather-related event, right, that type of thing?
You can, remembering with weather-related events that you still have to get the food to the location. But if you have a way of doing that, then by all means go for it. The thing that gets confusing about the Summer Food Service Program, and we'll get to this here on the next slide, is that there are a bunch of different ways of qualifying sites, and they're not necessarily intuitive. So there are a couple of ways listed here. If the school or the meal site is located within an income census tract, a low income census tract, you can feed everybody. If it's located at designated low income housing, you can feed everyone. If the school that serves the students in that community has more than 50% of their students qualifying for free and reduced meals, then a site within that community can be free. Or you can serve individual students who qualified for free and reduced price meals based on applications or those lists that we were talking about before. Those individual students can get the free meal reimbursed. But the problem with that is that you have to pay for the paid students out of some other funds. Those students can't be charged, and the funds can't come out of the school food service account. So that is an option. It's not the best option. The best option is if we can qualify you under one of those other scenarios, and in that case, you can feed all of the students for free and not be charging anybody. So to figure all this out, to figure out if your site is eligible, the best thing to do is contact Jamie Curley, who is the Summer Food Service Program consultant in our office at the Agency of Education, and she can help you determine the eligibility of certain sites. If you're a program that already operates a summer meals program, this is very easy. It's just editing your current agreement with the state to add the additional dates. So, you're operating in July and August, and then you add in, okay, we're going to operate on December 15th and 16th as well. So that's a pretty easy thing to do. If you have community programs that operate the summer meals program, you might want to talk to them because they may be able to go into this as well. So it may not actually be operated by the school. It might be operated by some other entity within the community. Some of those regulations for the summer meals programs, like I was saying, there are other entities that can operate it, but they do have to be a nonprofit organization. There is only one reimbursement rate. So for the regular school meals program, there is a free, what we call reduced and paid rate, and all of those student meals are to some extent, if not wholly, at least partially subsidized by the federal government. And so the summer meals program is a little bit different with just one reimbursement rate. Still have to follow health and safety rules. The meals still have to be eaten on site. So you cannot give students a bag lunch to take home and get reimbursement for that. So that does throw in a little bit of a complication there, but unfortunately that's one of the program regulations. Like I said before, meals for children ages 0 to 18 are reimbursable. And there is still a meal pattern that applies. So when we talk about the meal pattern, those are the regulations that say that you have to serve fruits and vegetables, that you have to serve you have to offer milk with the meal, and that you have to offer a certain number of components. The summer food service program regulations are a little bit more flexible than the school year program, but they do still exist. So you can't just, hand the kids a candy bar and call that a meal and get reimbursement for it. There are also some record keeping requirements, and all of those are listed at our summer food service program website, which is listed there. And you can transfer food and supplies from your school meals program to a summer feeding program. So let's say that you have all the food prepped for tomorrow, and then all of a sudden there's, for some reason an emergency school closure. You don't need to throw all that food out and buy new food for the summer food service program. You can just transfer, it's called a paper transfer, the foods from one program to the other, and just document the value of the items transferred, and that is absolutely okay.
Rosie, is there anything that can be pre-event? Can they use this program to store food in some of their emergency go bags, or have stockpiles of meals that are pre-incident that a lot of schools now are going and doing on their own? I'm assuming that this is all post.
Yeah, I mean, you could certainly do a little legwork ahead of time to figure out how you would qualify to operate the summer food service program. The only thing about you can't really purchase foods ahead of time specifically for the disaster using these programs. We'll get to USDA Foods in a second, okay. And the USDA Foods are something that it will be in your school and you can rely on. But there's not, you can't really use it to purchase MREs or that kind of thing.
Okay.
All right, and I think that's the last slide on the summer meals program. So again, it is it's a little bit, there are still regulations. It is still a federal meals program, but there are some situations when this could be really useful. And certainly strikes are something, if you've got a teacher strike or a transportation strike in the area, that's definitely a really good time to use this, because you generally have a little bit of warning, so it's easy to get that okay from the state to go into this program. And you can also serve the meals away from the school. So if you have a picket line and you're worried about crossing the picket line or that kind of thing, you can just take that away completely and be serving the meals at the library. And so ensuring that your students are still getting fed. You can do this during snow days, obviously weather, and you want people to be driving safely. But if you have a school that is centrally located and you have some program staff that happen to live nearby the school, then that might be a situation where this could work well. So it's kind of a know your community and think creatively about what could work well in these situations. But it is an option that's out there if it ends up being useful for your school. And if you think it is, go ahead and contact Jamie Curley, whose information was on the previous slide. All right. So then feeding the community during a disaster. So when we have that large-scale disaster, such as Tropical Storm Irene, those kinds of situations where you have both students to feed, as well as maybe your school's being used as a shelter, you need to feed community members, maybe you need to feed some first responders. We also have some resources available for these situations. So the first resource is your USDA Foods. Now USDA Foods are the foods that the federal government purchases on behalf of schools, that schools get in addition to that cash reimbursement for the free, reduced, and full price student meals. So every school gets about 32 cents worth of food per student meal served. And these, you may have seen, canned peaches, ground beef, shredded cheese. We call those the brown box USDA Foods. But there's also some fresh produce available through that program in the DoD Fresh program. And those are USDA Foods as well. And you can use those foods in these situations as well. So rather than keeping stockpiles of special disaster food all over the country, USDA just keeps tabs on where all their USDA foods are that they have purchased for school meals programs and for some other programs that they purchase these foods are for. And so when a disaster or situation of distress occurs, then USDA releases those foods that were originally intended for other programs for use in the disaster situation, and they reimburse or refund the entity that the foods belong to for them after the event occurs. So you likely have USDA Foods in your school kitchen if you participate in the National School Lunch Program. And it may be those brown box foods that we just talked about. It may be some DoD Fresh. You can go ahead and use those USDA foods in a disaster situation for emergency feeding. And they can be used for adults, for students, and also for first responders, as long as the first responders don't make up the majority of the people being fed. If you do this, you need to notify Vermont Child Nutrition Programs. Actually, you need to notify me, Rosie Kruger, as soon as you practically can with the following information: the projected timeline for feeding, how long that's going to go on, the number of people that you think you're going to serve, the number and location of feeding sites, and the quantity and type of USDA foods on hand that will be used. And then finally, if you're requesting additional USDA foods from the state. Now this, of course, depends on our transportation abilities. If all the roads are washed out, we're not going to be able to get additional foods to you. But if for some reason we do have some transportation ability, we can release additional foods from nearby schools or from the state contracted warehouse in Essex. So if you could use additional foods, it's good to let us know that. Again, we say notify me as soon as you practically can. Sometimes phones are out, internet's out, and you can't get in touch. If that's the case, go ahead and start doing this. Keep records of the type, quantity, and value of the USDA foods used and the number of people served. And then as soon as you practically can get in touch with the state, let me know. And my contact information is there. If you're not sure of the value of the USDA foods, I can certainly help you out with that, as long as you're keeping track of the quantity and which USDA foods were used. So, like I said before, in a presidentially declared disaster, USDA guarantees the replacement or refund of those USDA foods that were used. So your school food service program is not going to be suddenly left short of food. We are going to be able to make them whole under this program. If it's a situation of distress, which doesn't rise to the level of a presidentially declared disaster, USDA will provide that replacement or reimbursement of the USDA foods used if funding allows. And USDA has never in recent memory denied a request to use USDA foods in these circumstances. So it's very likely that you would get that. There is a limit, if it's not a presidentially declared disaster, on using these foods for only 30 days. However, if we hit 30 days and you're still feeding folks in a shelter or something, likely it's going to rise to that level. Like I said earlier, all types of USDA foods are included, those brown box foods or the DoD fresh produce, and volunteers and emergency workers can be served those meals using USDA foods as long as they're not the majority of the people being served. And remember that your volunteers and emergency workers are likely members of your own community, and if it's a large-scale disaster, they're likely affected and displaced as well. So their status as a displaced person in the disaster qualifies them to get the foods ahead of their status as an emergency worker. Right. So you can use those USDA foods to prepare meals. You can also get FEMA reimbursement for those costs that are associated with feeding during a disaster. Now, we're familiar with FEMA reimbursement in Vermont from Tropical Storm Irene. However, I think a lot of folks weren't aware or didn't really think about all those school food service program costs that happened and about submitting for reimbursement for those costs. So 75% of your staff overtime directly related to the disaster can be covered by FEMA. And so you're going to want to document all the hours worked by your school food authority personnel during the disaster, any wages, overtime paid. And if there are any volunteer hours, document those as well, because those count towards the 25% of the local community contribution. So it can actually, those volunteer hours can up the amount that FEMA will pay to the community. 75% of the commercially purchased foods can be reimbursed, so those are the non-USDA foods. So you're going to want to document the value of all the USDA or all the foods used for emergency feeding, and 75% of non-food supplies, paper plates, any equipment used, paper towels, all that kind of stuff. So you're going to want to keep good records of all of this if you're using your school kitchen, using the foods that were in your school kitchen, or having your school food service program, actually cook the meals and operate in the situation. And then submit all this information to the local Office of Emergency Management to submit for FEMA reimbursement. Just something to note here, this is certainly a lot of paperwork, a lot of documentation to do, but if your school is being used as a shelter, if you've got lots of folks kind of sitting around, grab one of them and use them as a volunteer and have them document all this for you. And then count those hours, those volunteer hours, towards your 25% of community contribution. So there are definitely some ways to maximize our federal assistance in these situations. Another thing here that we didn't really talk about, but of course, is insurance. And even if you are not able to get the FEMA reimbursement, if you have some kind of disaster and your school kitchen is affected, the freezer goes out, all of that kind of stuff, you should certainly be submitting for an insurance claim to replace those foods and supplies and stuff. So kind of bringing this all together, sometimes it's going to be the community that is the first to get there and the first to respond. But other times it will be an emergency feeding organization such as the Red Cross. It's going to quickly come in and take over feeding responsibilities. But that doesn't mean that the school food service program isn't involved. So there's a couple different things that could happen here. One is that an emergency feeding organization, and when I say emergency feeding organization or EFO, generally I mean the Red Cross or some other organization like that, they may ask the state agency, Vermont Child Nutrition Programs, to provide USDA foods to their sites. And that's something that we can do. When we get that request, we would then direct the school food authority to release their USDA foods, the stuff that's in their freezer and on their shelves, to the emergency feeding organization. If that happens, you're going to need to document the value of those foods that you gave up so that we can ensure that we can get the refund or replacement of those foods. The emergency feeding organization may want to use the school to prepare and serve meals for displaced people, either as a shelter in the school or for some other shelter down the road. And if that's the situation, you may want to work with the emergency feeding organization ahead of time to come up with a formal agreement for who's going to be in charge in the kitchen, how the food and supplies are going to be used, and if any school food authority staff time to handle all of this is going to be covered. So that's something you can do ahead of time. Talk to your local emergency response team, local Red Cross, whoever's generally involved in disaster management, and come up with just kind of an agreement ahead of time about who's in charge and how you're going to handle this stuff. And then finally, this is a really interesting option. The emergency feeding organization can actually buy meals from your school food authority. So in addition to having those student meals, any school food authority can sell meals to adults at what we call the adult meal rate. Generally, it's about $4 to $5. And that adult meal rate is meant to cover the entire cost of the meal, whereas the student meals are subsidized by the federal government through those USDA Foods and through the cash subsidies, cash reimbursements. But an adult meal is not subsidized, so the rate has to cover the full cost of the meal. However, our school meals programs are really good at coming up with healthy meals that feed large volumes of people for a very cost-effective meal rate. So again, I said generally $4 to $5 is the adult meal rate in most schools in Vermont. And in a disaster situation, an emergency feeding organization like the Red Cross will have to provide meals somehow, and will often go out and buy the meals from KFC or from Pizza Hut or some other fast food restaurant. Instead, they could buy the meals from the local school food authority. So the school food authority is using the food that's sitting in their kitchen already that might go bad before the end of the disaster, is preparing a healthy meal that, I don't know about you, but I would much rather have a healthy meal when I'm dealing with some kind of traumatic disaster situation than an unhealthy fast food meal, especially day after day after day. And it's a way of kind of tying that all together. The school food authority stays whole and is able to, not to profit off of this, but to use the foods, and they're not losing money on it like they may have done in Hurricane Irene or other situations. The emergency feeding organization is likely saving money because they're not having to pay the commercial costs, and the displaced folks are getting a good meal. So this can be used in any situation, even thinking back to that one family that had a house fire. You could decide to offer to sell the parents meals at the adult meal rate, $4 or $5 when they're living in a hotel room for a healthy meal, rather than having to get takeout. And they could pay it themselves, or somebody in the community could pay it. In all those situations, that would be 100% okay. In this situation with a large-scale disaster, if you're charging the emergency feeding organization the per meal rate, you want to remember to subtract the value of those USDA foods used in the meal, because you're going to get the reimbursement or refund of those foods. And another thing that you can do in this situation is, if you are able to go into summer feeding for the students, or for kids 0 to 18, you could actually have a situation where the school is being used as a shelter. You have your kitchen, you've got your folks there ready to cook. You cook a meal and send the kids through the line first. You count all the kids ages 0 to 18. You, after the disaster is over, turn around and submit that to the state, and we'll submit that to USDA through the Summer Food Service Program, and we'll get the full reimbursement for those students. After you send the students through the line, you send the adults, the first responders, everybody else through the line, and send that bill to the emergency feeding organization, less the value of the USDA foods used in that meal. And again, in that situation, we're getting as much funding as possible from the federal government to pay for this situation, and the burden is not being left on the local community. So there are some really creative ways of thinking about this here.
Rosie, you talked about the agreements with the emergency food organizations and things. Folks, those are the same types of agreements that we should be having with our first responders as well as our evacuation and family reunification sites. So a lot of those existing forms for the memorandums of understanding can just be transitioned into those types of agreements with those organizations as well.
Yeah, that's great. And this is kind of, you want to think about who are my contacts and have these conversations ahead of time, so that when this happens, you don't have to figure out who to call. You just can call them directly. So this leads really well into what to do now. The first and easiest thing probably is to create and keep a list of disaster contacts at home and school, specifically for the food service program. And we actually have a template of this list that will be available on the School Safety Center website with this presentation. I also have it, and I am happy to email it directly to you. My contact information is at the end of this presentation if you're not able to get your hands on it another way. But this template has at the top our contacts at Vermont Child Nutrition Programs. So there were a few things we talked about that you would need to contact us directly for if you wanted to go into summer feeding or if you wanted to use those USDA foods. So our contact information is there. And then the next section is your school contacts. So you're going to want to have all your school food authority staff listed there and their emergency information, as well as your facilities maintenance person. You may need to get in there to deal with a generator or to deal with some refrigerators and freezers, all that kind of stuff. And anybody in your school administration that you would need to talk to. If you have any way of contacting the community when you're doing some emergency feeding, such as a phone tree, local radio announcements, it's beginning to be standard that, at least in cities in the U.S., when we have snow days and that kind of thing, along with the school closings announcements, you will also see in the local media an announcement of where meals will be served. And so we would love to see that happening in Vermont as well. So any of those kinds of contacts would be listed there. And if you have any school staff that live locally to your school who might be able to get in a snow day or other weather situation and kind of do this in an emergency situation, you could include them as well. And finally, the last section on that contact sheet is any local emergency management contacts. So generally, all towns in Vermont have these emergency management offices. It's often the fire chief in the town who is the person who's in charge. So it's great to reach out to them ahead of time and get any other contacts if there's a local Red Cross or that kind of thing, and put those contacts down there.
And Rosie, this blends and goes in seamlessly to what we've been doing across the state when we meet with superintendents and principals. We really have been talking about getting their school crisis planning team involved in the local government issues as well, and the emergency management directors, the LEPCs and the RPCs, getting to know their local government officials, prior to the emergency rather than after the emergency, and getting those points of contact and a name face recognition with the folks in the community that can help out with this stuff. So it just reinforces the need to do that.
Exactly. And we've been working with some folks in emergency management as well, and I'm always surprised and then not surprised to realize how they do not realize that these resources exist. So it's often up to the school to reach out and say, hey, we can be an asset in this situation. So go ahead and fill out that contact sheet, keep it updated, print out hard copies because your computer may not be available or might not work in a disaster situation. And then start thinking about what type of disasters and emergencies that would require feeding are most likely in your community. Is your school in a floodplain? Are there other situations that might hit your school building or your community? And start doing some kind of preliminary emergency planning, which it sounds like folks are already starting to do. But remember to think about the food service side of things as well. If you have a food service management company, in your school, you're going to want to talk to them as well. Make sure that your contract covers what they're going to do and what you're going to do in that situation, because that can get a little bit more complicated than if your school food authority is just what we call an independently operated school food authority that's part of kind of the school and not contracted out to a private management company. And then you could write up your thoughts into a simple plan. Doesn't need to be fancy at all. Just kind of, here are some possible scenarios that might happen, and here are what we would do in those situations. And then reaching out to the local or emergency management office to become involved in that disaster planning.
And Rosie, this is certainly one of the things when folks get together with their school crisis planning teams every month or every quarter, or with the broader supervisory union or district meetings that they may be having in every quarter or semi-annually. This is one of the topics of conversations that I would recommend folks have a conversation about. Kind of one of those things that you don't really remember it's there until you need it,
right.
But certainly one of those things that we should be preparing for and getting these plans and getting the points of contact together certainly before the incident takes place.
Exactly. So here's a kind of a close-up of the Vermont Child Nutrition Program's contacts. I'm the third one down there, so you can certainly reach out to me or any of the other staff in our office. We do a more extensive child nutrition programs disaster planning class that also delves into how to prepare your kitchen for the disaster, what to do to prepare for a power outage, that kind of thing, and delves in a little bit more deeply into some of these topics, how exactly you're going to claim those students, all that kind of thing. And we will be teaching that again at our Tri-State Conference, which is the first week of May 2017, as well as at our Summer Institute, which is our week-long child nutrition programs training that we hold every year, and that's generally the second week of August. So if I've really, piqued your interest and you want to do some more in-depth training, complete with scenarios and stuff, you're welcome to attend those conferences, even if you're not specifically a school food service program staff person. And we can certainly do some more training there. And you're welcome to reach out to me directly if you have any specific questions about any of these topics, and I would be happy to help with that.
And all of Rosie's information, the PowerPoint slide deck, this video, as well as all the additional resources that Rosie has, she's agreed to go ahead and make those available at our School Safety Center's website. And Rosie, if we could also maybe get some of the information about the conferences, and maybe a conference announcement so that we can post that on the website as well. I think we would be that would be great.
Yeah, at this point they're just kind of save the dates, but
that would be great.
As we have the additional information, we'll put that up there.
Rosie, thanks so much for spending some time with us. And again, the contact information if you need to reach out to Rosie directly is there. And I appreciate you folks taking the time to listen to us.